Just a few more comments about this practice we're doing today before we go back to the practice. So probably many of you found this practice more challenging than the breath, and generally for two reasons. One is, of course, the mind is a more subtle object. The breath is a physical, tangible object, so it's a little bit easier to focus on. And secondly, the other reason many people find this particularly challenging, this practice, is we don't have a habit of observing our mind. Our habit is that whenever something comes up in our mind, we latch onto it and we follow it. Or the other habit we have now is if something comes up that's not so pleasant and we don't know how to deal with it, we try and stuff it back down, we try and suppress it. So now our strong habit is either following or suppressing. So in this practice, of course, we're not doing neither. We're simply stepping back and watching things as they arise and pass. So therefore, we don't really have the habit of doing that. So therefore, for many of us, it's challenging. But as Shantideva says, that we mentioned already, I think, no matter how difficult something seems, everything with practice becomes easy. So all we got to do is practice. The more we practice this, the easier it will become. So therefore, to let go of any completely unrealistic expectations that we'll be able to be there and very easily observe things as they arise and pass. I mean, for most of us, that's not going to happen in the initial stages. And just to acknowledge that what's going to probably happen as soon as something comes, we go. That's where we are. So to accept that. And then when we get distracted, when we realise that, recognise that, just let it go and come back. So just keep coming back, coming back, coming back. And the more we do that, the more we'll develop the ability to simply be there without getting swept away. But of course that'll take time, so to be very patient with ourselves. And to speak a little bit more about the practice, again, I'd like to read from Alan Wallace's Attention Revolution on page 101. He says the following. When you first begin the practice of settling the mind in its natural state, so again, that's the name he gives to this practice, you may have difficulty identifying the intangible domain of the mind. Or even if you do settle your awareness there, after some time your attention may become vague, disoriented, or spaced out. If you have difficulty identifying the domain of the mind or sustaining attention there, consciously bring up a thought such as, "What is the mind?" and attend to it. Don't think about this question or try to answer it. Just observe the thought itself, watching it emerge in the field of consciousness and then dissolve back into that space. Once it's gone, keep your focus right where the thought was and see what comes up next. If you slip back into a kind of lax, mindless vacuity, deliberately generate the thought again and observe it with bare attention. When you become familiar with this practice, you will no longer need to generate such a thought to crystallize your awareness and locate your attention. That will happen by itself as thoughts arise and pass of their own accord. The practice of attending to the space of the mind and whatever events arise there is like taking a naturalist's field trip into the wilderness of your mind. When you first embark on this inward journey, you may perceive very little. But as you grow more accustomed to the practice, you will begin to identify an increasing quantity and range of mental phenomena. Some of them are discrete, like thoughts and images, while others are nebulous, like emotions and moods. This practice provides you with experiential access to a domain that cannot be observed with any of the instruments of modern science or technology. The most they can do is detect the neural and behavioural correlates of the phenomena you are observing directly. You have become a naturalist of the mind, and a whole new world is opening up to you that for most people remains largely unconscious. In this practice, the locus of awareness gradually descends from the superficial level of coarse mental activity that is immediately accessible through introspection down into the inner recesses of the mind that are normally below the threshold of consciousness. You discover in this training that the border between conscious and unconscious mental events shifts in relation to the degrees of relaxation, stability, and clarity of attention. Especially when you engage in this practice for many hours each day, for days, weeks, or months at a time, you dredge the depths of your own psyche. In doing so, you remember long forgotten experiences, both pleasant and unpleasant, and a wide range of desires and emotions. What happens here is a kind of luminously clear discerning, free association of thoughts, mental images, memories, desires, fantasies, and emotions. You are plumbing the depths of your own mind, undistracted by external diversions. Once hidden phenomena are unmasked through the lack of suppression of whatever comes up. This is potentially an extraordinarily deep kind of therapy, and the more intensively you practice it, the more important it is to proceed under the guidance of an experienced, compassionate teacher. During your meditation sessions, internalize the wisdom of this contemplative tradition and make sure you implement the core instructions of the practice, which are: whatever arises in the mind, do not be carried away by it, and do not grasp onto or identify with it. Just let it be. Watch thoughts, feelings, or other mental events arise. With discerning intelligence, be aware of their nature and let them slip back into the space of awareness without any judgment or intervention on your part. This is the key to letting the knots of the psyche unravel themselves as the extraordinary healing capacity of the mind reveals itself. This is the path to deep sanity. One more point and then we go to the practice. One of the most common experiences, of course, when we begin this practice is as soon as something comes up, we grab hold of it and off we go, constantly caught up in our thoughts and emotions. So if you're finding that you're constantly getting caught up in your thoughts and emotions and memories and so forth, what you might like to do in this meditation is introduce a little bit of labeling or noting. That is, give a name to the mental event that's arising. So if some thought arises, just simply go thought. Or if it's a memory, just go memory. Or image, emotion, irritation. Give it a name. But keep it very simple. Otherwise it just becomes commentary on commentary on commentary. Because if we give a name to it, then it becomes an object and we're free of it. So you might like to introduce a little bit of labelling of the mental events to give some space from them. So that's one thing we can do. But remember, this is just a short-term temporary strategy because we're adding something to the practice. So this is not part of the normal practice. But like counting the breath, this labelling or noting could be helpful in the short term to help us to get into the practice. But then once we are into the practice, then we'll need to slowly let go of labelling and noting and just with bare attention observe things as they rise and pass. So again, you might like, if you're getting distracted a lot, caught up a lot, you might like to bring that in this session, in this meditation. And then, of course, like all shamatha practices, the basis is relaxation. Because in this practice, generally we find it quite challenging to observe thoughts, then the natural tendency, of course, is to really tense like this. So if you notice tension in the body or the mind, then again on every out breath, relax, relax, release that tension. Just release it. So really be as relaxed as possible when we're doing this practice, and just be a little bit watchful if we're starting to tense in doing this practice. Okay, so that's some more instruction. So let's now do that practice again. So another 20-minute session. So as always, we begin by preparing the body. So keeping the back nice and straight. And at the same time allow the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And preparing the mind, setting it into a state of ease and relaxation. Simply allowing it to come to rest in the present moment. And simply becoming aware of the rhythm of your breath. whilst maintaining that basis of a relaxed body and mind, allow your eyes to be at least partially open, resting your gaze in the space in front of you. And now bring your attention to your own mind and observe your own mind and whatever is arising in the space of the mind. Simply be like an impartial observer or witness, observing thoughts and other mental events as they arise and pass, without grasping to them, without becoming distracted. If you find that you've got caught up in a thought and got carried away, remember the first thing to do is simply relax. Then release grasping onto that thought and very gently return to observing the mind. So relax, release and return. Simply keep coming back to the mind again and again, patiently and happily. And if you're finding that you're constantly getting caught up in your thoughts and emotions and so forth, and getting carried away, you might like to introduce some labeling or noting to help stabilize your attention. That is, give a name to what's arising in the mind, like thought, image, memory, and so forth. In that way we can have some space from them. And again, keeping both the body and the mind completely relaxed. Releasing any tension on every out-breath. If you're becoming frustrated at not being able to observe your thoughts, observe that frustration. Or if you're getting bored with the practice, observe that boredom. Whatever is arising in the mind, observe it.